too, just because I'm trying to take my wife. I want to go back out for a Seahawk game, but we'll see how that goes. But Doug, man, it is good to finally have you on the podcast. We've been connected for a little over a month now in trying to get this scheduled and on the books. And so, man, it's so good to have you on here and ready. Man, I'm excited to spotlight your work. You've written a lot more than I thought you have.
Well, yeah, well, a little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me on the show and everything too.
Yeah. Well, no,
Yeah.
I didn't realize just how many awards you've gotten. I mean, you've written a lot of poetry. You've got your book out now. I mean, you've kind of dabbled and published a lot of different works. And man, I would love for you just to kind of give an overview of just kind of what led you into your passion of writing just in general, and then kind of how that's, I don't know, just the journey you've been on in the last few years with it.
Well, right on. Well, the writing, of course, is something I've always been involved in. I've been doing it since I was a kid. It's one of those things that I hooked into that I seem to enjoy, that didn't seem to cause any damage to the world. I always loved it. I didn't really ever have a very big passion to publish, though. In fact, I was kind of comfortable just working on that art, sharing with friends, keeping it small, but always, passionate about the art and, reading and studying and trying to, you know, reach those heights of the beautiful accomplishments I'd seen other writers achieve in their writing. I was always sort of fascinated. I was talking to somebody the other day, and I was trying to trace down what that little magic is, and I think it's that moment when you're reading
Yeah.
and suddenly the world disappears and you go into the book. There's a moment where you get literate yourself, right? You remember that? And not just learn to read, but you learn how to go into the movie theater of the book and stuff like.
Yeah.
And I think that feeling, that's something that the writer's chasing too, but the challenge is to create it yourself and then believe it. Anyway,
Yeah.
I also teach, and the university, well, college where I teach provides certain pay step increases if you publish, certain amount of
Mhm.
publishing can. So the reality is I started publishing for money, but not the
Yeah.
money that came from the publication. But what happened is that I ended up really enjoying it. And I had very fortunate experiences. First working with Diane Borsenek, publishing Interstate, first chapbook of poetry. Actually, before that, with a guy named David LeBounty, publishing a chapbook of my first novel. And working with the editors was a lot of fun. It was fun to kind of, work with somebody else, and not in a grad school workshop way, but
Yeah.
another professional who this is their livelihood, and they're passionate about my work too. And so that sort of makes me rise up to the occasion and say,
Yeah.
I better show up and do a good job here. And I enjoyed that next process too, which was to work on a piece of literature, poetry or fiction, to bring it into the world in a new way, in a way that really said, okay, I'm going to make it public,
Yeah.
which is kind of scary, right? And so really I had pretty fortunate experiences with editors I've worked with along the way. And that's kind of kept me going too, because they're serious about their work and they work with me in a way that I can understand, is sympathetic and sees the vision I'm trying to create. That's a lot of fun. And so I've kind of kept going back to it.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And actually, Doug, it's kind of funny you mentioned you wanted to publish. Obviously, it's cool to get published, but like the motivation of, hey, I want to get a pay increase. And I was actually literally like 2 days ago, I was thinking of questions how I ask a lot of authors, and I'm like, I wonder if anyone will ever be honest with me and say like, hey, I published because I want to make more money. Because I see a lot of, like people in the business space, everyone coaches them up like, hey, if you want to take your consulting business to the next level, or you want to be more credible, you got to write a book. And then a lot of them say like, hey, it's really not the book that makes you more money. It's the speaking engagements you get from it or the business you get from it. But no one's ever like specifically said like, hey, I got a pay increase if I publish my work. And so I was like, when's someone going to do that? And then you did. And I was like, perfect timing.
But, the funny part about it is that, that motivation over here it's complemented by the other,
Yeah.
which is the joy of fun of working with somebody and creating the product of a book, a beautiful
Yep.
artwork. And then my approach then was always to, be respectful and work well with my editors and hope that that creates another opportunity to make another work of art. So,
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I want to talk about your book, The Invisible Hand. I mean, you've got it right there that you held up. Yeah. No, so I want you to dive into this more, Doug, because it's a story with three main characters,
Yeah.
totally different stories of what's going on. But give kind of a high level overview of what you're trying to show. Because I don't know what you're trying to show, but like I want to hear it in your own words, because it is a unique book in the fact it's not one that people probably read every day, this type of structure to it.
Working with a publisher on this book, I've, of course, been trying to think of ways to have a conversation about it like this with you and how to represent it, which I found more difficult than my previous novel or even my poetry, because it even though, The Invisible Hand, the title and a lot of the concepts of the book come out of this lexicon of economic terminology and ways of looking at the world. That sort of came along a little bit after a lot of the threads were already developing and weaving. So it was really three people's stories that kind of came bashing into my head to be told. They weren't my stories. It was actually the first novel that I published. It's in the third person as opposed to the first person. And so there was a difference in voice, a difference in kind of way that the stories were showing up in my mind in this third person way, these three people, a Sarah and a Gabriel and a Jones, who were not, like, more specifically me amplified in an I version of a fiction story. And so they were otherworldly, which was kind of interesting. It was a unique experience. And so I just let it happen, let these three stories continue to tell each other. I didn't even know that they were woven together at first, but as I kind of kept bouncing behind or back and forth between them, they continued to weave together. And the title of The Invisible Hand, this idea coming out of Adam Smith's economics, the mystery, I like to represent that as Adam Smith sitting back, having finished his magnum opus, Wealth of Nations, and feeling quite proud and smug that he had, created a nice map of this social, economic, behavioral, world we live in. But having that moment where he's like, oh, dang, there's a missing piece. There's something I don't understand. And so I say it's a moment of intellectual failure, but poetic triumph to come up with that term, the invisible hand, because it's beautiful. And when you start playing around with it, it has some of those qualities of a really good symbol or metaphor, which is, it can continue to generate ideas and thought even beyond any kind of definition you could create for it. It's just going to keep being mysterious. And I like that. So I like that element that there's something mysterious going on in these people's lives and these people's stories coming together in the book. That's an invisible hand. I also like the fact that when I began to discover the fact that a lot of their lives were being impacted by forces they didn't understand, economic forces, social forces. And so I like that. And so I then began to lean more into some of that language of the economics. And so I have at the back of it a little list of terms for the chapter titles that are coming out of economics. And I had fun then playing with those terms in chapter shaping and sort of developing each part and bouncing it back and forth between the idea of the title, like the Paris Club is one of them. And Paris Club is like this outside the typical financial institutional way, and people move money around. So as I was discovering more mystery, even in the economics world, that seemed to be a nice parallel to the mystery of these people's experience. So that the invisible hand then becomes even a bigger model. It's me. I'm the invisible hand crafting their world, but there's an invisible hand behind me crafting my world, and I just like that exploration. So that's kind of where it all added up to me.
I was actually thinking of your book this weekend. I don't know. I love the word we're using, intellectual, because it does make you think. But I was actually watching the show Ozark, and
Yeah.
there was a moment there where Marty was talking about how every decision a human makes, there's this ripple effect of things that happen, or someone else's previous decision, how that ripple affect how that I don't know, changed your specific scenario and your next step and decision. So I kind of got deep into thought on that, on just, I don't know, again, the invisible hand and what has been created for me to be here right now, like what my next decision, how that impacts people around me and the world. I don't know. I just kind of went down a rabbit hole on thinking about all that. And it is interesting. You can sit there and think about this for a long time. But your book's really cool about doing that, is you got to really, you brought it up in the first part of the episode here of just like getting when you're reading something and getting lost into the story and then almost like a movie and really getting the wheels turning. Your book does that. But I was just again, I was watching a show, Ozark, and then your book came to mind as I was just kind of having these certain thoughts.
Appreciate that comparison. I've seen the show, couple of the seasons. I don't know how many it went to, but I
Yeah.
saw at least the first two. And I do appreciate that comparison. And when I think about it, I think of the ways in which, yeah, people are making decisions and choices which are going to radically change their lives and affect others. And I think there's an element of that in a lot of the people's stories in The Invisible Hand too, where they are often at these moments of like the opening, Sarah, she has provided testimony that puts her father in prison. What's her next move? Sets fire to the family house and gets on a bus. So
Yeah.
yeah, I love that element of kind of ramifications of your decisions, but even you can't be sure.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that's what I like about it is like you don't really know what the next move is, and then when it happens, you don't know what the next move is or what's gonna happen. So there's just this constant like, "Phew, what's
Yeah.
going what's gonna happen?"
And I like the way I like the movement, their lives are changing. It's kind of it may not seem fast paced on the surface, but yeah, scene by scene, things are radically changing.
Yeah. Where do you, Doug, get your creativity from? Because you talked about like growing up, reading a lot, writing a lot. Like, did your parents encourage that? Like, did your friends, like, how did you become? Because I always laugh because I grew up and I had friends who they loved to read and I had friends who hated to read. And like, how did you get influenced to I guess pick up that hobby at the time? An interest. And then, yeah. I mean, where'd that come from?
Yeah, it wasn't an automatic. Now, early on, I didn't like reading either. I'd much rather watch a movie or TV, read a
Yeah.
comic book. Comic books, though, that's really where I entered into the reading because, you got the image and the words there, so it's kind of a faster narrative. But yeah, I reluctantly read early school days, and I often remember back to a middle school teacher of ours who gave us a book to read called Johnny Got His Gun by Dalton Trumbull. And it's the story of a World War I soldier who gets basically blown up. Arms and legs are blown off, his face, eyes, ear. He's deaf, he's blind. He's just lying in a hospital bed, nothing but a mind trapped in a body. He can't move, he can't hear, he can't speak. And towards the end, he discovers he can communicate with the nurses by tapping Morse code with his head. Sorry, but the message he keeps sending them to is kill me. Anyway, but the bulk of this story is a lot of his memory. And there was something about when I got into that book and reading it, I got lost. And it was that's what I mean by that moment. And it was that moment that something kind of triggered. And I, of course, didn't.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But your
Yeah.
interest was kinda born, you remember that book, and I'm glad you share that because that's kind of like the whole purpose behind Books for Guys is to help specifically younger guys find that moment earlier in their life where they go like, "Hey, man, like, reading is great." Because I always share my story as, like, a former athlete. I didn't have that moment until really I was late into college where I
Mhm.
was just bored on a weekend, and I picked up a book that my grandma gave me, and it was a sports book, but I read it in that short weekend. I was like, "This is awesome. I love this book. Let me find another one like it." But then that expanded my just desire to read different things and
Mhm.
about different people and different subjects. And then all of a sudden I was like, "Dang, I wish I'd have done this when I was younger. Like how much more I could have learned or how my path could have maybe was shaped a little bit different, it's in a good way, just with thoughts and approaches to different things." And so I love that you share like your moment where you're like, "Ah, like, man, this was awesome. Like, I got lost in this book and I'll never forget it."
Well, what was it about the reading for you that was unique or different from, say, watching a movie or listening to music?
Yeah, so great question, actually. So the book I read was actually about a football coach, Tony Dungy,
Mm.
and it was called Quiet Strength. And I guess at the time, I love football, still do, but it was cool learning his path of how he grew up, very close knit family, how he got into coaching and his approach to leadership and how to lead guys and stuff like that. And I guess just at that age, I was just curious on I've been around different coaches and I knew what I liked and didn't like. And so I was
Mhm.
just curious on his approach to certain guys and players. But then, it kind of led me into wanting to learn more about leadership. So I'd read different books about different CEOs or whatnot. And then, that kind of trickled into finance and I got interested in like investing and money. And I was like, man, how can I make more money? Like, this is cool, like, so just different interests were piqued that I didn't really know I had,
Mhm.
but it all kind of started from that one book, and I was like, "Dang, this is awesome, like, this is really" and then I started reading about people that I thought I may not like or I may not agree with, and I was just kinda, like, opening my world on purpose to challenge myself,
Were
and it
you
felt good to do that.
were you aware, 'cause I wasn't at the time, but were you aware, or at what point maybe did you become aware that by reading, though, you were getting knowledge, you were getting information in a unique way as opposed to listening to a podcast or
Yeah.
hearing a
Yeah, I was
lecture from a teacher?
definitely was soaking it in at a
Yeah.
deeper level where I was understanding it and actually, I guess, absorbing more than just sitting there and watching. Because like, I'd watch a movie and be like, "Oh, that was good," I remember this one part, da, da, da. But I guess, like, reading the story, I don't know, I just remember so much more about it because I took the time and I was reading word for word and engaged instead of just kinda, like, letting it come through my eyes, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, there I definitely it was different. I was taking in more of the information and actually, like, thinking about it more and more in depth, and again, it triggered something in me to wanna go, get more information and learn more and do
Right.
more. So, yeah, that was my experience. I was like, "Holy cow, this was awesome."
It makes me think there's two examples that seem to kinda clarify for me how
Mhm.
that experience is meaningful. One is in terms of knowledge seeking or information gathering, it's kinda like the 10 ox herding pictures from the Chinese, Japanese, Buddhist tradition where you catch a little glimpse of something, and then you just keep following it as you kind of discover
Yeah.
more and you kind of intuitively know to keep going. And the other is I think I've been thinking about this more recently too, that the reason why there is this close parallel between that moment of when you're reading and you kind of dissolve into it and then writing and creating is I think they are both seated in something in the imagination. And I think when we're reading the first time, when it starts to click online, become our own internal theater directors. So
Yes.
you're participating, but you don't know it. I don't know it. I don't think it. I'm reading and, but my imagination's developing the scenery. I mean, I have words, but I could make it look any way I want depending on the word too, right? Because
Right.
I could say chair to you and you might imagine the Homer 2000 or, an Adirondack, whatever. And so there's all that freedom even in your own imagination while reading to create the universe out of that score. And I think that something is interesting about imagination, imagining what's not there, imagining, the future, imagining. So that
Yeah.
little muscle, that little power, I think, comes online.
Yeah, because when you're watching something, you don't have to do any of the work. That's already been created. You're just absorbing. But when reading, you're creating that
Yeah.
specific moment in your head where you're
Yeah.
there again, creating the background, the voices, and you're
Yeah.
you're doing all of the work yourself. Yeah, 100%, I believe that, and I think too, Doug, is I read a book I was interested in. It
Yeah.
wasn't one that I was told to read, and again, those were good in a different way, but I didn't put myself fully into the engagement mode. It was something I had to do, but when I actually grabbed a book that I was like, "I want to read this," and
Mhm.
then I enjoyed it, I was like, "I wanna read another book I'm interested in." So it just kinda clicked of me getting to do it on my own terms in a way.
Mhm.
I got to choose what I wanted to learn about, and that kinda helped, I think, too. And that's kind of, again, kind of the goal with Books for Guys is, like, I want young guys to pick what they're interested in. I don't really care what you pick. The goal is I hope your wheels start turning and you're like, "Huh, like, that was
Mhm.
a great book. Let me read another one." And just see what path it takes you down, because for me, it took me down a bunch of different interests, and I'm glad it did. I don't know where I'd be without, reading that first book that opened me up to this world of, I don't know, creativity in a way. I'm definitely not a writer. I haven't gotten that bug or been able to do that, but the
Yeah.
sense of learning and how my approach to, I don't know, just critical thinking, I've seen such a difference in growth,
Mhm.
first book to now, and I'm so appreciative of it. And I love when other people start to experience that as well. And I'm like, oh man, this is the good stuff here. You're really getting something from this.
I wonder if, yeah, I think most of us, like I'm hearing you describe, have that element too of, like you said, critical thinking comes in,
Mhm.
where you have a bit of an aha, a bit of an awakening. And I think that's a powerful experience that you get in reading that's unique. I'm
Yeah.
curious, Chris, when you started getting more involved in reading, did you have friends too that you talked about some of what you read or that you'd share books with?
Yeah. So at first it was few and far between.
Yeah.
There wasn't a whole lot of buddies to talk about certain books to, but I kind of saw the light bulb click in them as well. Like I
Mhm.
did. I'd say, like, man, I just read this book. It was awesome. You should read it. And I had a couple friends who did, or they were reading different books. But that circle's grown a lot over the last like 5 to 10 years now. Now I have buddies that are like, dude, have you read this one? Like I just read it and it was like my world's changed, you know? So I get a bunch of
Yeah.
good recommendations and more friends have realized just how important reading is and just kind of what they're learning. So it's really cool for me to see. It's almost like I was first
Yeah.
to a lot of my friends, and then to see them see that light bulb click, I'm like, oh man, this is awesome, you know. And now they're recommending things to me that can help me, you know, in different areas of life. And so, yeah. So at first I didn't have a lot, but over the years that number's grown to where those conversations are had more often about books or hey, if you're struggling at certain things, read this. Like this helped me a lot. Or hey, your interest is here. Like here, man, this is awesome. There's a leadership book I just read. It's different than the others. So yeah, we bounce a lot more ideas off each other now. And Books for Guys obviously helps with that.
Yeah. I'm curious of chicken and egg situation. The reading then leads you to create a community of other readers, or your community, one reads, starts influencing others to read. Know what I mean? Because I remember my buddy Eric Morrison, he got all hipped on reading like Edgar Rice Burroughs books and the Conan books. I mean, we're like 14, 15. And so
Yeah,
he
yeah.
started turning me onto those too. And then I got into that. And then my buddy Charlie Steele, he kind of came in when I got a little more interested in some literature. And I don't know why. Somewhere along the path, though, I started going, I want a little more.
Yeah.
I want to read the Steinbeck. I want to read the, Toni Morrison. I want to read the hard stuff. I want to understand the good stuff.
Yep. Yeah.
Keep
And I
going.
think I'm like in that journey now. I
Yeah.
find myself craving something that challenges me a little bit more. And I
Yeah.
find myself even in life, like some things I'm like, okay, this is so mundane and basic. I don't like it. I need something more to keep me challenged. And it's literacy, it's
Yes.
style of writing. It's
Hmm.
because even the last 2 or 3 years, that's kind of when I've started to pick up more fiction work too, and getting more into that. And man, there's so much benefit to getting lost in a fiction book, and there's so many different genres and twists. I mean, even yours, like the way it's written, it challenges you, and you also got to like give yourself to it. You can't just read it half-heartedly. Like you've got to get into the book to understand like what's going on. It's a challenging. I mean, it's not super challenging, but it does challenge you to get involved in the words. And so I've definitely I think I'm in that journey now of where I'm wanting to challenge myself more and more with more difficult reading, I guess, for lack of a better term of it.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I've read a couple of recent reviews of the book in which people said, I had a little trouble getting started at first because there's no quotation marks on the dialogue. And yet, once I got reading it, it flowed. And that was actually a very intentional part of my work on this one, was I wanted to strip down as much of the structure of the, systems holding things in place
Yeah.
so that the language would mirror somewhat the world that it's representing. And so the challenge for me was, how do I do that, but make it so it's still fun to read, so that
Mhm.
once you kind of get, oh, okay, then you can just listen. So that's where the poetry, I think, is an important piece of the puzzle, is that the language has to work.
Yeah.
It's got, for me, and I'm not saying I've made it, but that's what I'm trying to get to,
Yeah.
so that you can, if you just listen, if all you're doing is listening and you take away your, editor mind that says, wait a minute, there should be quotation marks here, let that quiet down, just let the language happen. Then it's as clear as a bell. It's just, you're in the universe, and that gives more room for the imagination in some ways, I think.
Yeah.
the reader's imagination.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like this was a unique challenge for you as a
Mhm,
writer and structuring this in a different way,
mhm.
which is also interesting because I guess my question to you is like, as you've over the years, with different writings and poems and whatnot, do you find yourself, and you may have just answered this question, do you find yourself wanting to challenge yourself more and more in wanting to do some of these things that are a little bit different than the status quo as far as like structure goes?
I'm self-aware enough to not want to just be difficult for difficult sake, just
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
if it's challenging to read, it's gonna be smarter. And, I'm not really sort of structurally oriented in the way, like, before I set out, I'm making choices like, "I will do this," you know, using only Latin-based word or something like that. It's a little more intuitive as I get into it, and this is an interesting part of the process I've continued to try to refine and understand is it's active and critically aware and intentional as much as it's intuitive and listening and allowing
Yeah.
things happen in a language way. Does that make sense? So I resist kind of like the idea that even the best of the writers that I love too could explain and understand every little thing about their work, right? There's, I think, a way in which the artist has to almost be reaching for something she or he doesn't even understand, but trust the effort so that there's still a mystery to be discovered, even for the writer of the work. And I think that's a little bit of not so that it's just random and haphazard and I'll just throw anything on the page and it will somehow make meaning, but somehow in the refining of it, not trying to corral it or fuse it down too hard into something you can understand, but rather leave some room for the living language, the living environment of the artwork to be reaching further. You've heard of Carl Jung, probably the psychiatrist, psychologist, and he said that the perfect symbol in art always, and I mentioned this a little earlier, exceeds the definitions we give it. And so that's part of, I think, for me in working on this is to not be too intentional or to watch my own intentions and not let them get in the way of the creative imagination process to,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. No,
that's
I love that. No, I love that. No, it makes sense to me. And, I think this is going to kind of lead in my last question for you, Doug, because I
right.
think we've done a really good job of talking about your book. And I think encouraging people to pick it up, if nothing else, to kind of challenge themselves to read something that may again, push their boundaries a little bit, to see what they get from it.
Hmm.
But you see, this may be a difficult question for you because I ask everyone who comes on the podcast this, but I
All
see a
right.
lot of books behind you, and I'm always curious to know what is a book or two that has had a big impact on you, personally or professionally. And if someone like myself was like, "Hey, Doug, I need a new book recommendation," what's one that you would like to recommend right now?
Boy, all these books kept popping into my head, like, Toni Morrison's Bluest Eyes, Melville's Moby Dick. But the one that kind of my mind arrives at more is a writer by the name of Leslie Marmon Silko, who wrote a book called Ceremonies. Pueblo Laguna identifies Pueblo Laguna, New Mexico area, be kind of territory of tribal communities. And her book, Ceremony, it's this beautiful layering of a contemporary story, traditional stories, and a kind of another mystery element. And I've always loved the way in which kind of and I suppose the reason that one comes to my mind now is that as I look at The Invisible, it has in it a kind of similar concept, but the invisible hand for her is not so invisible. It's what Chininako, the creative Kachina god in the tradition that she grew up in, who tells the stories. The universe, the world is all a product of storytelling. These basically got, and there's a beautiful writer by the name of Octavio Paz, writer, poet, and fiction writer from Mexico. And he's got a really cool short story called The Blue Bouquet, in which the character has this little revelation and sort of looks at the universe, goes, the universe is just a conversation between giant beings, and I'm just a syllable, a pause, you know, an expression in that dialogue. And I love that kind of, it's sort of meta fictional,
Yeah.
but a little bit mystical. And yeah, Leslie Marmon Silko, Ceremony. That's one I'd
Oh,
recommend. And it's
yeah.
challenging too, but in a way that really, um, I don't know, fuels your imagination as you're reading, as you're the theater designer, and also, like you said, kind of excites your curiosity to discover more and learn more about this other way of looking at the universe.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. I'll add that to my reading list. That'll be something that I can challenge myself with, and maybe some others will as well. But Doug, man, this has been fantastic. We've got your
Oh,
book on the
thanks.
Books for Guys website. So if anybody's
Cool.
interested, they can go look at that and obviously go purchase it. And can't wait to hear what people say is again, I'm a fan. I can't wait to hear what other
Well,
people say as well when they read it. But Doug, we appreciate it. This has been awesome.
I've had a good time. Thanks for having me on here, Chris. It's been fun to talk.